We all know Yu-Gi-Oh! As a fun card game. Bro, I'm about to play Jinzo and then he's done for. Fuck. I have to say though, I grew up in a time when card effects were just 1 or 2 sentences long and you didn't have to read a whole damn book. But besides the card game that conquered the world, there's also the anime and manga. For many people who only know the anime, it's just a kids show with a funny card game. Especially if you only watched the dub where people were using finger pistols. And not the ones from One Piece. The skilled Yu-Gi-Oh! Enjoyer, of course, knows all about the dark past back before the card game took over. We are talking knives, guns, people getting burned alive, and even Leatherface. It had it all. The Yugi pros among us also appreciate the character development of surprisingly complex characters like Kaiba and Joey. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Is so much more than that. There's a hidden message that Kazuki Takahashi embedded in this work. And that's exactly why, today, I'm going to unveil the true essence of Yu-Gi-Oh! On the surface, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is all about games. Later, duel monsters take center stage, the mystery of Atem unfolds, and we follow Yugi and his friends on their journey. The 4 main characters in the series are Atem, Yugi Muto, Joey Wheeler, and Seto Kaiba. What connects the 3 modern-day boys with Atem is something that might not be immediately obvious at first glance. They all go through significant character development. From a weak, insecure pushover to a confident man who's fully in control of his own destiny. From a cold businessman who couldn't even appreciate his own brother's love and nearly killed him, to a man capable of giving and receiving love again. From an unloved, discarded boy, raised in violence and self-doubt, to a man who's not only strong but also believes in himself and has the courage to face the future head-on. It's about growth, about character development, and about fatherhood. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, deep beneath the surface, a story about father figures. In Japanese society, it was, and still is to some extent, not uncommon for fathers to be almost absent from their children's lives due to harsh working conditions and long hours. Whether this was the case for Kazuki Takahashi himself is unknown. However, he clearly notices it and put it into his work. The theme of father figures in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, in many ways, a core element of the entire story. The journeys of Yugi, Joey and Kaiba paint a picture of young men who, for various reasons, grew up without a functioning father figure, and as a result, none of them were able to develop as they should have. None of the 3 fathers could be seen as role models or fatherly figures. At best, they serve as negative examples. One is non-existent, another doesn't see you as a person. And the last one couldn't care less about you and doesn't even want you to exist. Yugi Muto represents the soft, kind-hearted, yet naive boy who never had a father figure to look up to. His mother is there to teach him values like compassion and gentleness, but we don't even know his father. At the start, Yugi is shy, introverted and deeply insecure. While he does have his grandfather, Solomon, who acts as a kind of father, or of course more like a grandfather figure, the significant age gap and the lack of a father-son dynamic make it hard for Yugi to develop an image of what it means to be a man. The Millennium Puzzle, and by extension Atem, steps in to fill the role of a mentor and a direct father figure. Through Atem, Yugi learns how to take responsibility, show determination, and become aware of his moral values. The Pharaoh provides exactly what a father should: a role model, strength, and the assurance that you can stand up for yourself even when life has you knee-deep in trouble. Seto Kaiba is the complete opposite. He's subjected to a cold, twisted form of fatherly upbringing under Gozaburo Kaiba. No mother, just strictness and brutality, no room for soft feelings or moral principles. Gozaburo aimed to mold Seto into a ruthless businessman, a driven egomaniac without a conscience. This father had the exact opposite influence on Seto that Atem had on Yugi. Instead of support and moral values like honor, there was only performance, dominance, psychological and physical abuse and manipulation. Gozaburo didn't even see Seto as a human being, but merely as a tool. Seto is the son who suffers immense damage due to this broken father figure. At the start, he is completely heartless, focused solely on power, and views other people more as chess pieces than as individuals. Atem, with his interactions with Seto and the resulting lessons about respect and honor, also acts as a father figure for Kaiba. However, this isn't the kind of loving guidance that comes from constant mentoring, but rather a moral reflection. Kaiba is already strong in terms of willpower and determination. Nobody can match him there. But Atem needed to remind him of what humanity means, to show him that he's not just a cold, lifeless tool. Every confrontation with the true heart of a duelist forces Kaiba to redefine his own worldview. He starts to recognize the values that Atem and Yugi embody, even if he refuses to openly admit it. For Kaiba, the principle of the strongest survivors reigns supreme. Yet, Atem repeatedly demonstrates that the strength of unity and love is greater than the strength of isolation and hatred that Gozaburo instilled in him. Through these lessons, Kaiba begins to break free from the warped world his adoptive father created for him. Joey had it just as rough. He ends up with a father who's an alcoholic, a gambler, and anything but a positive role model. Growing up in an environment like that, it's almost impossible to learn how to become a decent man. Unless at some point you realize, man, I definitely don't want to end up like this. Joey spends his time on the streets, getting into fights and crimes. In short, he's on the fast track to completely screwing up his life. His encounter with Yugi, and through him Atem, steers him off the destructive path. Yugi represents a good heart, and Atem symbolizes the strength of justice and honor, which awaken Joey's own potential. Joey develops the qualities of a true friend, someone who stands up for others, and eventually the perseverance to pull himself out of his broken environment. Atem gives Joey one critical message: you can be more than the crap you come from if you're willing to believe in yourself. But since we have already covered Kaiba's and Joey's development, let's focus not just on the character growth of Yugi Muto, but also on the father-son relationship between him and Atem, which is, of course, the most developed in the story. Yugi starts out as a timid, friendless kid who not only gets bullied by Joey and Tristan at school, but also sees himself as too worthless to even play with others. On top of that, he gets beaten up by Ushio because he's not a walking ATM to pay the protection money Ushio tries to extort from him. Yugi doesn't fight back and avoids violence, not because he's some saint, but simply because he's too weak. He has no choice because he's as solid as ice cream left out in the sun for too long. He's so helpless that Thea has to step in to protect him. His weakness is further highlighted when Tristan bluntly tells Thea and Yugi to stay out of the gang's hideout to check on Joey because they are too weak to handle it. The same pattern repeats later on Duelist Kingdom. As soon as Bandit Keith shows up, Yugi gets tossed around like a human dish rag, only to be saved by Joey again. While Yugi had his heart in the right place thanks to his mother's upbringing, he still needed to become stronger, to stand up for his values, to protect himself and his friends. He needed to become a man, something he never learned how to do without a father figure in his life. But then came the turning point, completing the Millennium Puzzle. Suddenly, there's someone in his life who embodies honor, wisdom, leadership qualities. Well, he's a pharaoh after all. Out of nowhere, Yugi has a Captain Honorable inside him, someone who literally solves problems through games and even punishes those who are dishonorable or cheat. This is also how he gained his lifelong friends. And from now on, most of the time it goes like this. Little Yugi runs into a problem, usually caused by his own naivety. Sometimes his friends step in to help, but they usually just end up in danger themselves. That's when Atem steps in to bail them out of trouble. Up until the encounter with Shadi, Yugi isn't even aware that he is swapping places with Atem, who takes care of things for him. Just like parents who protect their children from dangers the kids don't even know exist, Atem smoothed out countless situations for Yugi. Daddy Atem was there, taking out the trash without Yugi even realizing there was trash in the first place. It's only through Shadi that the curtain is pulled back and Yugi begins to understand that he's not alone. there's someone supporting him, someone guiding him, someone teaching him how to transform from a wet rag into a proper towel. During their second encounter, Shadi deliberately puts Yugi's friends in danger to draw Atem out. First, he uses some poor guy as a zombie slave to nearly strangle Joey and cause chaos, and then he manipulates Thea, taking her as a hostage. And all just to lose to Atem in his own games for a second time. But after this game, something changes. Atem no longer steps in immediately. As long as Yugi has his friends around him, he lets them handle things as a team. It's only when Yugi is truly on his own, like when Joey is poisoned by Mokuba, that Atem steps in. Because Atem himself learned a big lesson during this game. The game was essentially about being tested over and over again. If you show fear, a capsule breaks. If you show courage, you pass the trial calmly and move on to the next round. If all 4 capsules break, the game is lost. But it wasn't just about Thea's life, who at the moment was standing on the 10-meter diving board. Each of the 4 capsules represented the 4 people present. The first capsule broke before the game even really started. That was Atem, who was afraid to face the game and look within himself. The other 3 capsules represented Thea, Joey and Yugi, who would all also die if Atem failed to push through his fear and lost the game. More than anything, Atem learned that he had to overcome his fear in order to trust his friends. Atem may have forgotten who he is and where he comes from, but he is still himself. And that means he is still a pharaoh who once ruled an entire nation, bringing with him exceptional leadership qualities. And one crucial trait of a leader is the ability to trust their people. He understands that physical conflicts can be handled within the team, especially by Joey and Tristan, who act as the muscles. Yugi and Thea represents the emotions. Together, they can accomplish a great deal. That's why, throughout the entire Death Tea amusement park, Atem let the team handle things on their own, because he trusted them to get through it. Even if they could have died, lost their hands, or faced other dangers, he didn't intervene. Even when Yugi was completely overwhelmed and in despair, Atem didn't step in because his friends had his back and managed to motivate him again. Atem only got involved when Yugi faced a one-on-one duel. This was also the moment Yugi accepted his other self, Atem, within him. He realized how important it is to have that side of yourself. Alone they might be weak, but together they can face anything. Just like Exodia, which symbolically brought the Death Tea final against Kaiba to a close. Exodia represents nothing less than Thea, Yugi, Tristan, Joey and Atem. Yugi never would have made it through all the trials on his own. It was only because he found friends who stuck with him through thick and thin that he was able to overcome the challenges. In the Dungeons and Dragons battle against Bakura, Yugi and Atem finally meet face to face, which allows them to establish a stronger connection and gain better control over the dynamic after the game. Here begins Yugi Muto's true development. While he's gained some courage through his friends and knows he can rely on Atem when things get serious, he's still very naive and personally weak. He struggles to assert himself and faces the game of life without much strength. This is exactly why he gave Exodia to Weevil, even though those cards were the key to winning the tournament and, by extension, saving Solomon's life. His grandfather's life depended on them. And because they lost their trump card, Atem decides not to take any risks and takes full control for the time being, allowing Yugi to learn by observing. From this point on, Atem remains in charge. He duels against Weevil, he duels against Marco Tsunami. While there weren't any real tricks here, just field power bonuses, Atem leaves nothing to chance, showing exactly how it's done. This approach pays off in the duel against Mokuba. Here, Atem reacts faster than a mantis shrimp, grabbing Mokuba's hand before he can run off with the starships. If Yugi had been in charge, he likely wouldn't have had the confidence to grab Mokuba's arm so decisively, and Mokuba would have gotten away, promising Mokuba that he would defeat Pegasus for him, before moving on to duel against the fake Kaiba puppeteer. Once that's taken care of, we get Joey's duel against Rex Raptor, a match Joey wants to handle completely on his own, without tips or any puzzle magic. Atem respects this request, stepping aside to let Joey take charge. In a way, this is the first time Yugi really touches the ground of Duelist Kingdom himself. Does Yugi get to duel because of this? No. But not because Atem doesn't believe in him, it's because Yugi doesn't believe in himself. He knows everyone relies on Atem, not him. That Thea isn't really into him, but into the guy with a deep voice inside him. Or when Kaiba shows up and makes it clear they have no chance against Pegasus, and only when Atem appears does Kaiba show any respect. Even though Joey and the others see Yugi as a friend, they still view Atem as the leader. And that's understandable, because Yugi still sees it that way too. He hasn't suddenly gained the qualities of a leader out of nowhere. That's why Atem continues to handle the duels and every dangerous situation. Then the search for Joey and the tag team duel with Joey against Para and Dogs. And before they head to the castle, only one duel remains. The one against Kaiba, which Atem of course takes on. Until the very end, when Yugi finally takes back control. This is a very critical and defining moment, perfectly reflecting the dynamic between the two. Kaiba had to face defeat, but instead of accepting it, he simply threatens suicide. This puts Atem in a serious dilemma. Either he attacks, wins the duel, secures entry into the castle and gets the chance to win the tournament and defeat Pegasus, but doing so might cause Kaiba to jump into the abyss. Or he refuses to attack, loses the duel and forfeits entry into the castle and the opportunity to face Pegasus, along with any chance of saving his grandfather. In that case, Kaiba would survive, but he would end up dead after the duel against Pegasus anyway. This whole situation became so complicated primarily because of Pegasus' hostage taking of Solomon. If Pegasus didn't have Solomon in his grasp, Atem wouldn't have gone through with the final attack. He would have simply conceded the win to Kaiba rather than risk him jumping. If Pegasus were to immediately kill Kaiba upon his loss, meaning Kaiba's death wasn't his own doing, then Atem and the group might have found another way to free Solomon from the VHS tape. But the reality is different. Solomon is trapped and Kaiba's actions are of his own free will. This means Atem wasn't blindly following the path of ruthless victory, but was forced to act under extreme conditions. He didn't want to win to prove his own honor or strength. He wanted to win to save the life of someone deeply loved. In that moment, if Atem hesitates or decides not to attack Kaiba, he risks Yugi's grandfather's death. In this irrational situation, the cost of mercy is simply too high. Atem has to show strength no matter the cost to save Solomon. Atem comes from ancient Egypt, where he bore the responsibility of leading an entire kingdom. Anyone who commands an army or protects a nation will inevitably face dilemmas with no perfect solutions. Sometimes bitter decisions must be made. Protecting your own people might require attacking an enemy settlement or showing strength to prevent even greater suffering. Someone who prioritizes protecting his people above all else, even if it means sacrificing others. In this situation, Atem acted as a true leader would, making the difficult but necessary decision to save a life he was responsible for. From the perspective of leadership, Atem did everything right. Yugi, on the other hand, sensitive and raised without the mindset of rulership, sees Kaiba in a self-inflicted situation, but can't bring himself to push someone toward death intentionally, even if it puts his grandfather's life at risk. Having been raised primarily by his mother, Yugi has developed a deeply compassionate way of thinking. He's not prepared to reorder his priorities in situations of life and death. For Yugi, empathy and consideration are what matter most, not the kind of geopolitical calculations or sacrifice-based decisions that a ruler like Atem has to make. This situation was a complete shock for Yugi, a moment where he likely sacrificed his grandfather to prevent Kaiba from jumping. He allowed himself to be intimidated and blackmailed by fear. Suddenly, he was forced to confront a life or death decision. The idea of actively driving someone to their death, no matter the reason, was profound disturbing to him. That everything turned out fine in the end was, in a way, pure luck. Or fate, if you want to see it like that. Mai could have just as easily run into another panic-type duelist and failed to collect the extra star chips needed to get Yugi back into the tournament. In that sense, Yugi's hesitation could have led to a total disaster. But the fear goes much deeper. Yugi is now afraid of the game itself because he has come to understand that it's not just an entertaining challenge, it's a mirror reflecting the darkest depths of human nature. This moment ultimately sparks Yugi's journey toward developing his own moral compass. He realizes that, while he can learn from Atem, he must ultimately decide for himself what is right and wrong. He begins to see that he doesn't have to blindly follow Atem as a role model, but should also critically question his actions. In doing so, Yugi grows beyond the role of a mere student, learning to take responsibility for his decisions and to harmonize the values taught to him by his family, his friends, and even Atem. The fear of the game and of his other self becomes a catalyst for his maturity. At first, Yugi was really down about the decision, but since everything worked out thanks to Mai, he regains his resolve. He decides to take on more responsibility, and during the duel against Pegasus, he and Atem take turns switching back and forth to outsmart the Millennium Eye. Through their teamwork and Yugi's courage, knowing that he might lose his life in the Shadow game, they manage to bring Pegasus to his knees. It was like Exodia was summoned again, but not with cards, but with the power of their bond in his mind. This prevented Pegasus from reading their thoughts even when they were no longer able to swap positions. Atem entered the duel against Pegasus fully aware that if he lost, his soul would also be taken. He had nothing to gain personally from this duel, but he fought for Yugi to free Solomon. He dueled for Kaiba and Mokuba to help them getting free again, and he dueled for Joey to secure the prize money needed for Serenity's surgery, something Joey himself had never experienced before. And now that Yugi knows he can communicate with Atem and guide him according to his own values and ideals, he's more willing to talk big and take risks. However, he still relies heavily on Atem's strength and wisdom. By watching Atem closely and learning step by step, Yugi continuously affirms what he's already started to understand. That works well enough until his puzzle is stolen and he is suddenly forced to duel on his own. At first he falls back into his old patterns, but since winning is the only way to get Atem back, he summons new courage and gives it his all. Still, he is not yet ready to stand on his own. That's why Bakura steps in to act as a kind of Atem for him, offering tips and encouragement to help him stay grounded. With Bakura's help, Yugi is able to win the duel. However, his challenges don't stop there. Right after, he's nearly turned into a human torch by Duke's father, a situation only resolved because Joey and Tristan, the team's muscles A and B, show up in time to save him. Even though Yugi has made clear and noticeable progress since Duelist Kingdom, he still has a lot to learn before he can truly stand on his own 2 feet. Thea is the first to realize it. The others only catch on a bit later. But with the mystery of the Millennium Puzzle and its connection to Egypt, it becomes clear that Atem can't stay by Yugi's side forever. Just like a father can't always be there for their child. Because at some point, sooner or later, you have to say goodbye. Preparing for that moment is almost impossible. Thing we can do until then is to become the best version of himself and prove that he can stand on his own. That's why Yugi gives 110%, absorbing everything he can from Atem to build his own identity and stand firmly by it when the time comes. During the Battle City journey, Atem teaches Yugi to take pride on his own cards and to respect the pride others have in theirs. That's why Atem would never take a card from an ordinary duelist by force, unless it's an Egyptian god card or it's willingly gifted to him. Atem shows Yugi what it means to inspire someone by giving them motivation, like he promises Joey his red eyes. But Yugi stays true to his moral values. While Atem had no issue getting Pandora's legs cut off during their duel, since he had also cutted his cards to cheat, Yugi stepped in and saved his ass at the last moment. And through his conversation with Marik, Yugi begins to understand that Atem can't play the role of his guardian angel forever. He realizes that he didn't want Atem to leave because he felt safe with him, but he also comes to accept that this can't last forever. Especially because during the duel against Krillin on Crack, Yugi realizes that Atem isn't untouchable. Under the pressure of Slifer, Atem nearly succumbs to despair. if Kaiba hadn't shown up to snap him out of it and help him refocus. One of the biggest lessons, however, is learned during the duel against Joey. A major step in growing up and becoming independent is taking responsibility. Not just for yourself, but for others. Up until this point, Yugi had never truly been able to take responsibility. He always needed saving. If it wasn't Atem, it was Joey, Bakura, Tristan or Tia. He had to be rescued by Mai, otherwise he would have lost his grandfather, a favor she only owed him because of Atem. Joey always saved him whenever things got physical. Now it was finally time for Yugi to step up and take charge to stand his ground as a man and free Joey from Marik's control. The moment had come for him to try something on his own without Atem stepping in. And after Yugi overcame this challenge on his own, even Atem realized that he could still learn something from Yugi. It is kindness. Just because the father taught the child everything he knows doesn't mean he can't learn something in return as the child begins to take the first steps toward adulthood. Atem sees how much Yugi has grown. While Yugi hasn't surpassed him just yet, it won't be long before he does. Because one day, the children will also support the father. Joey helps Atem in the duel against Kaiba as a spirit, and Kaiba assists in the duel against Marik by providing the keycard. After Battle City, Yugi has matured and starts taking matters into his own hands. When the 3 god cards are stolen, instead of Atem stepping in and taking over to resolve the situation as usual, Yugi is now strong enough to handle it himself. Yeah, it's a bit unfortunate that Yugi doesn't actually finish the thief off and Bakura ends up handling it instead. Then the journey continues into Atem's memories, where they seek to uncover his true name. Here, Yugi steps up and completes the task, defeating Bakura in a one-on-one duel entirely on his own. A Yugi from the days of Duelist Kingdom would have been completely overwhelmed. So now they are able to bring Atem his true name, marking the end of their adventure together. And since Kaiba had already his final duel against Atem and was ultimately pushed out of his darkness, and Joey also got his chance to prove himself, not only keeping his promise to duel Yugi, but also very likely defeating him, it leaves just one person who still needs to prove himself. From a timid kid with no confidence or strength, Yugi has grown into someone who has personally conquered the darkness. But this is where the true heart of the story lies. The final duel where Yugi must prove that he can stand on his own. This last step, this final walk into his own life, is something everyone must face. Sooner or later, we are all let go. We all must move forward without the protective hand of the father, the mentor. The time with them is limited. The strong voice that cheered you on will fall silent. One day, the wise eyes that guided you will close, leaving only memories behind. And it's in those memories that the true treasure lies. The gift we carry forever in our hearts. Perhaps it's cruel that every father eventually disappears, whether through age, death, or simply the circumstances of life. But that's precisely why it's so important to absorb every lesson, to etch every trial endured together deep into our hearts, to treasure every smile, every piece of advice, every quiet hug. Because when the day comes that we are on our own, those memories remain like a shining mosaic within us. A picture made up of 1,000 small moments shaping us into who we are. And so, Yugi's true story begins only now. He steps out into the world, free from the constant presence of the father he had grown to love so dearly. And this is the path we all must walk at some point in our lives. And as Joey once said, you don't have to understand it. You just have to accept it. Burn the memories into your mind. The time we spent together, the feelings, burn it in so that you never forget. Because in the end, those memories are the most precious thing we have left.